What is up, grinders? Welcome to an MMA Crunch Time before lock. A little bit early. It was supposed to be a 4 p.m. lock today. They switched it to a 7. They switched it back to a 4. They switched it back to a 7. And we lost 2 fights. Squirrel, this is an interesting thing because 11 fights, lots of flyweights, lots of action fights, lots of chalk. How are you handling this tricky slate? And overall thoughts on this one? Because, listen, MMA has been watered down. We need to get to 303 without more fights falling off.
Yeah, you said it got switched back to 4, and I had to look at my phone.
No.
I'm like, wait, what's going on?
Through the week, it had switched back and forth. I didn't mean to scare you.
Yeah, no worries. Because I knew it had switched to 7.
No,
it's an interesting card. Unfortunately, we've lost a couple of fights. The Aliscara fight, I maybe didn't even have that much of an impact on the slate, at least in terms of, like, I hadn't really started, digging in yet, and he was a massive favorite and also really high priced. I was sad to lose the Joshua Van Ulanbekov fight because I thought that one was going to be maybe a little bit overlooked. Like, I thought it was going to be higher scoring, whichever fighter won. So yeah, now we're down to 11 fights, and it's tough because I kind of don't have 6 fights that I really love. And so, I'm going to just like hand building some lineups. I run out of fights that I like. And so I'm going to have at least one fight that I'm maybe not crazy about in my lineup, but hey, so is everybody else. I think it's the card, the thing that, kind of screams to me is the theme of the card is we have to decide whether we want like fighters that I think could be really high priced or like the winner of a fight that could be high priced or high scoring, if that makes sense. So like a winner of a fight that could be high scoring, or like just, the winner that like could be of a high scoring fight. So I'm going to go, I think, underweight some of the really high priced guys and end up maybe a little bit more in the mid range, hoping that just like those fights outscore the other fights.
Yeah, that's the thing about this. You look at this card, I think even somewhat early on in the week when we had 13 fights, there were ranges, distinct ranges this week where there's just, I don't know if we've really seen like 3 fighters almost 50% owned, all up above 6,300. You got Saragi here, you've got Menes, you've got Amabayev. The context of the slate too, with like so many grapplers, I think is so important to kind of break down, because we can go through this all day long and say, oh yeah, they're gonna win. But there's some unknown ceilings with a lot of these grapple heavy fighters. And I think that's very interesting. When we're going to be targeting, these grapple heavy fighters, we want them to get the pitter patter. We don't want them to just control, hug. And I think there's a lot of that hidden scoring all over the place. I just want to get right away to our play that we both tagged blindly, because I feel like I don't know why her ownership didn't go up through the roof after fights got canceled. But let's just focus on the top 3 for the time being. Let's hit that Almabayev, Menes, Saragi. I think it's going to be important. If one of these fighters loses, there's your leverage point on the slate. You can do whatever the hell you want for salary after it. You can grab a piece in the middle. You can continue to go up. Is that kind of how you're looking at this? Because, all the ownership on these 3.
Yeah, so I was even thinking about playing around with a rule and say at most one of them. Because I think if you have 2 of them, you're suddenly getting a bunch of underdogs that are just not all going to win their fight. And you're almost certainly going to be maybe having the opponent of the third that, that you're hoping then gets a win. But I do.
There's duplication too, John. The duplication will come into play once you grab 2.
Yeah, exactly. You could have some like heavily duplicated lineups, and that's always an issue as you start losing fights. As you get down to like 11 fights, 10 fights on a card, or something like that, it's like, well, everybody's just got the same lineups. If you're not stacking a fight, so I like of the top 3, I like Almabayev the best, and I think they're all going to see about similar ownership. It's really hard. I guess we've got like 46, 49, and 42. Like that could be scrambled. I think any one of them could be the highest owned fighter. I like Almabayev the best, but he's the most expensive. So I think he's the one that is in the fight that is most likely to score well. So like if Jose Johnson wins, like Jose Johnson's probably going to have a high scoring, is going to be really high scoring because it could involve like some reversals or whatever the grappling points, right? The Nate Maness fight is maybe the one that I want to be the most under the field on. Because like I don't know what his scoring looks like if he doesn't get that first round win. And he's got a really good chance of getting the first round win. But if he doesn't get it, then what does it look like if he wins in the second round or in the third round? And then the Saragi fight, I don't know, he's maybe one that's really hard, scary to be under the field on, just because like that 58 or something % implied probability of a first round win is a little bit scary. But
he's facing Weston Wilson, John.
Weston Wilson's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC because he got into the UFC by like going around and selling software. So like at the smaller events, and he's really into fighting. And I guess he like kind of like was persistent, and I think he's got like some connections with was it Stephen Thompson?
Yep.
But he hasn't looked great in his first 2 UFC fights, and that's expected to continue into his next one. So I think my favorite in this range is Almabayev, and I'm gonna probably try to be under the field on Manus and Saragi, maybe at the field or maybe a little bit under the field.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think Saragi's fight is going to be interesting because the guy's somewhat unknown still, to be fair. What is he? He's got wins in the UFC Contender Series or whatever the hell it was, the overseas one that gets him into the big show. Yeah. I mean, he's not fighting the best people, and he doesn't even have the best pace out there either. I feel like any type of win, if he got to the second or third round, wasn't going to look like gold. And he's got the perfect matchup on this slate where it's like you have a quick win bonus in play for him. You've got a first round equity, but man, does that fall off a cliff, particularly for him. And dare I say, Weston Wilson might be able second and third round to be a little bit better. I mean, we don't know. He might have output. Any of these fighters that we're talking about, Wilson, Flick, Johnson, any form of a win is going to be okay on this slate. I don't see a world. Maybe Flick, right? Flick doesn't do a hell of a lot. He could go for a submission, and I don't even know if he wins 2 rounds, to be fair. Like, that's how crazy this slate is. And I think we both agree. This is your leverage point, right? Getting one of these guys. Off air, TJ said perhaps Jose Johnson was one of the guys that backfilled his lineup late. It makes sense.
Yeah, you're seeing a little bit of line movement towards like Jose Johnson, which is interesting. Like a lot of times these like massive favorites just get even more massive as people just like stick them into parlays or whatever. I don't know what the effect is, but I think that Jose Johnson, you're seeing a little bit of like win equity creep up. So yeah, and I think if one of these really low owned underdogs wins, or low priced underdogs wins, there's a really good chance they're in the winning lineup. I'm interested in maybe the possibility, like what happens if Saragi gets a second minute first round win, and it's 95 points or something like that, 96 points, or same thing with Nate Maness, and it's 95, 96 points. But then some of the fighters that aren't getting finished, maybe like an Armfield or Knudsen, is putting up 100 in a decision win or more, 105 in a decision win, and then you've got like a little bit of a narrative flip where it's like the fighter in the decision fights is outscoring the first round fight.
You had to go to Knudsen. That's our girl on this slate. The path of victory is way too strong. The pitter patter is too strong. The ownership, there's no way she's like 11%. She's going to be 15. I think it goes higher and lower field stuff, single entry, and higher dollar stuff because people are just too smart now. But we both tagged her. My grin was getting bigger and bigger when I saw you did as well. But it's also tricky because like I know Taira is the other grappler on this slate, right? Like we talk about it and then high stand, right? We'll talk about the underdog and high stand. But I think it's hard to ignore that Tatsuro Taira at 8,600. I mean, main event, 5 rounds, the ability to cook the opponent, the path of victory is strong, the early finish equity, and it's not even like you're paying the 9,500, John. So I think Taira is so important, obvious, and Knudsen is that tricky play that you and I like that I don't think people are going to go to. So those two other grapplers.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's such a fight night card, right? Because like we do this with fight nights. As well, this fighter's making their debut, and this fighter, has only been in one UFC fight. It's not the pay-per-views. We tend to have a lot more, history on the fighter, and there's a lot more we can look to say, well, there's a consistent thing where they're doing this, or they're high paced, or they're not. Here we've got a lot more unknowns than I think people realize. So yeah, I like Knudsen, and it's the grappling. And then yeah, you mentioned like Taira. That's yeah. We want like the significant strikes as well, right? The Taira fight is interesting because I think what happens if it like stays on the feet. And so I'm going back and forth on Taira. I'm probably going to end up under the field because he's got like 50. We're seeing him, showing him like more than 50% ownership. I probably don't like him that much, but I'm not like going out of my way to fade him either. I think it's just a combination of I think he's going to. I think he's going to see a lot of ownership because he's in the main event. I'm kind of interested in his win by knockout kind of odds, or maybe a bet there. Because
does that mean you're forcing Perez into lineups for leverage, or does that mean maybe you hope that it fight busts? Because I feel like that's the tricky decision when the smaller slate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Alex Perez, notably absent from the Squirrel Patrol's takedowns. I just don't love him. He's just got the ability to win a low scoring fight, which is good for him, but I'm not really interested for my DFS lineups. But you never know. It is 5 rounds. It's like not the best main event, not the worst, but it's not the best because like Taira's not super low volume. Alex Perez can be like a little bit lower volume, and it's favored to like go past the second round, I think, but end before the fourth, or end before like 4.5 rounds.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Not good.
It could just end up being another fight on the card. And then like Taira's ownership maybe is a little bit high at 51%.
I also feel like Taira's path to stalling Perez too. It makes him even more difficult by, cage control if he does get him to the mat. I do like that Perez has wrestling in his back pocket. It's not like a ton of people that have talked about it, but like if he's able to like keep this thing on the feet, it just, I think fantasy wise falls off a cliff the deeper it goes.
Yeah, I think you could end up staying more on the feet than people realize. Like Alex Perez is a good takedown defense, but I actually think Taira is maybe better on the feet than people realize. So
yeah.
So I think it's possible like Taira wins a fight that's on the feet, but it's maybe not great for DFS.
Absolutely. What is your next? Would we just go to another grappler and Brady high stand? Because I mean, there's just all this range of fighters I don't have faith in that can win and absolutely get some good equity, from Fugit to Nerdembeke to high stand. I'll talk about an Almeida and Judas in a minute, but let's just talk about those three because I feel like, Perez, we just said, is right there in that range, and we've tagged pretty much everybody around him but Perez. And high stand's path of victory is just grind, takedowns. But I feel like he could get caught in a submission. He could get outgunned on the feet. If the takedowns don't get there, is Armfield going to be low enough ownership if he gets a first round finish that he kills off that equity in high stand? Because I think people are going to go to him. He's 30%, according to Lineup HQ at this moment.
So I'm interested in both sides of this fight. Like this is a fight I'm interested in being over the field on, and just hoping that in a decision or that it doesn't even have to be a decision. Maybe more in a decision on high stand's part, it outscores the other fights that are a little bit flashier with the stronger odds. This fight, like looking at the fight props, it's got like some of the best fight props I think in any fight on the card. So like Armfield's about like over and under 63.5 significant strikes. I think that's the most on the card. And then 70.5 significant strikes. So yeah, it's the most on the card. High stands over under about 2.5 or 3.5 takedowns. I think like favored over 2.5 or under 3.5. So like that could be like actual fight scoring rather than like win equity scoring or around first round finish scoring. So I'm interested in just being over the field on this fight and thinking like, yeah, if Armfield wins, he could be piling up a lot of significant strikes and maybe get an early win. Or if high stands getting the win, it could be a lot of takedowns, maybe some control time, maybe some of the pitter patter. And then that's a high scoring win. So yeah, that's a fight I'm interested in being over the field on and in sacrificing some of the higher priced fighters.
Yeah, and I guess I grouped it in with Fugit and Nerdembike. I think out of those two, you could see either of them bust just because Quinlan's fights, there's not a ton. But on this other side, Adams actually had some action fights, to be fair. He's actually had some knockouts. I think that one is an interesting one. And then I really worry about the Nerdembeke and Costa, unlike other people, because I feel like there's a world where there's a takedown in one round or control time by one, the other guy controls, and then it just falls off a cliff because Nerdembeke doesn't score a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going back and forth with him on whether I should rate him up, and I think for the price I kind of had to, because he can score. His game log looks good with that Derek Minner fight. That really easy first round win there. But he does, he has put up like 98 and 100 in decisions before, in decision wins. So that's encouraging to see. And Costa is still a little bit of an unknown. I mean, we've seen him in 3 fights in the UFC, but I think his first one was like a late notice replacement kind of thing, and he looked surprisingly good. And then he's got 2 takedowns and 3 takedowns in his next 2 fights. But he had a pretty scary knockout loss to Steve Garcia in his last fight, and he's coming back like pretty quickly from that. So that's like a little bit concerning to see. And it's kind of thing where Becky gets the first round knockout, we'll be like, oh yeah, of course, like Costa should have taken more time off. But the odds on that aren't that strong. So I don't mind Nuremberg as a Shaylin as a underdog. Somebody you should definitely like sprinkle into your lineups, like not looking to be under the field on him. And then like Costa, I don't know. I mean, Costa's the favorite fighter here, and he has like a decent, about 1 in 6 chance for a first round win. So he's not something I'm going to ignore either.
They both can get takedowns. That's the concern for me in that one, is like if there was one guy with a distinct advantage where I knew Nerdembeke could control him on the mat, it would make life a lot easier to make the decision. But I feel like when they start grappling and it negates itself for fantasy, that's the problem. Quinlan, on any other slate, this guy would be like, what, 40% owned, 45% owned because of that inside the distance line, right? Like very strong. Any form of an inside the distance is going to be okay on this slate, I think. I just don't know if I could like play this fight and have a ton of confidence, because the one in between this one with Da Silva, Andrades, and Johns, I have no interest. We'll talk about that in a second as well. I just feel like the inside the distance line is drawing me into Quinlan. I just couldn't tag him because I have no faith in him being aggressive.
Yeah, so I agree. Actually, this is a fight that I like in the mid range. So I mean, there's kind of this consistent theme of I maybe want to take some of these, some of the ownership that's going to the really high priced fighters, right? Like Dalmayev, Manes, and Sargi, and target drop down in price a little bit to the mid range, to like the Knudsen, Armfield, maybe some of the Costa. I like that. Yeah, because I like that in Fugit, right? So if he's getting takedowns, that's a high scoring win for him. But I think if Josh Quinlan's getting the win, there's a good chance it's an early win. I see him with about like 23% implied probability for a first round win, about 53% overall chances for a win. So yeah, I like going with him. And if he does get that first round win, I mean, his chance for a high score looks just as good as like Nate Maness. And Maness is much more expensive, and he's going to be much higher owned. So yeah, I'd rather be over the field with somebody like Josh Quinlan, who's going to be seeing lower.
Yeah, it falls on the same rule for me. Buy low, man. You're buying low. I know it still says 30% owned, but I feel like I said, any other slate, he'd probably be higher owned. Middle range, no interest for me. But, I mean, if there's a finish, I think there will be a lot of interest. Silva, de Andrade, and Johns, they just don't score. Neither of these guys like to throw volume. Neither of these guys like to go in with a wrestling game plan. Does Douglas ever age, John? This guy, I wish I had an ounce of muscle that this guy has.
Yeah, well, you said it. Actually, I think this is a really interesting one because I've been talking up this mid-range, the whole mid-range of the salary range, the entire show until we get here, where I'm actually, and I think this one might see a little bit higher ownership than we're projecting because particularly on the Miles John side. He's got a really strong win equity now at 8,000. But I don't know that if you really need the $200, right?
Yep.
Or even like the $300, from between him and Quinlan. So I'm in Miles Johns has been low scoring in the past. I think I wrote up in the expert survey that his wins in the UFC, like 74 points, 55 points,
Gross.
87, 80, 81, 64. Like these are not high scores. Even at 8,000, like that's maybe not something you're happy to get in your lineup. And then the fact that Silva de Andrade, like his last win is 56 points. Like this is not good. I don't necessarily want to go under the field on De Silva or Douglas Silva de Andrade because he's only showing a 15% ownership. So like I don't know, I'd be fine with 20. Miles Johns like 24. I think it might be higher, and I might even be under the field on this 24.
Do you think this is somewhat of a mirror where we had Daniel Marcos as a slight favorite at the same exact price point as last week, and then John Castaneda just didn't show up? It was like, if you ran that fight 10 times, I think there's a different outcome all the time in that Castaneda and Marcos. And then you look at this one, and it's like, I feel like the same thing. There's just a bunch of different outcomes with the Silva de Andrades and Johns, even though Johns is what? Minus 140 or something like that at this stage. It's just, he's a cash play. He's safe, quote unquote, by the metrics, but he's not safe for scoring. That I can't get behind it in, big field.
Yeah, I'm scarred from a few weeks ago, the last pay-per-view event where I had who is it? Andre Lima, and he won his fight and put up like 58 points, and then the next fight, Jocelyn Edwards lost her fight and put up like 65. So this that kind of thing happens, right? Like win equity isn't everything. Especially if both fighters tend to be a little bit lower scoring, like they both might be sitting there trying to you feel the other fighter out for 4.5 minutes each round, and you might not be happy with whoever wins the fight. So it's just a fight I'm interested in being under the field on, and I think it's going to see high ownership because that win equity difference that we talked about, and it doesn't always mean as much as it seems like.
There'll be a win equity couple fighters here in a second. After I tell you about Roto Grinders Premium, there's never been a better time to sign up for Roto Grinders Premium with NBA, PGA, NHL, MMA, MLB, WNBA. We've got an option for whatever level you're looking for. Get yourself a 6-month combo subscription at an exclusive price of $469.99. That's a savings of $250 instead of buying all 6 individual months of combo premium. You can get yourself a first month of RG Premium for $40 off for a limited time. Those that want to give a test run, dip their toes into the water with a 3-day pass, $19.99. Check the links in the description for more information. 2 people I'm looking at for win equity. I'm somewhat surprised you didn't give a little love towards Lucas Almeida, and I'll tell you, it's really difficult to get behind him, okay? There is the clear play below Carly Judas, but Almeida's got more volume, man. He's got way more volume. Kawamba does not throw strikes. I feel like hidden win equity, hidden fantasy output question mark would look good, but he's got to stay conscious. I feel like, the durability is a question mark. I don't know how you get to Timmy Kawamba on this slate. I know he's getting ownership. I think that's going to be lower personally because there's just not a lot to get behind there. And especially because Carly Judas is going to garner all the ownership, right? This is the lowest price, quote unquote, I have some faith behind because she has a hell of a lot of volume in the Contender Series. Lost the fight, got into the UFC. Gabriel Fernandez somewhat can't stop a takedown. Probably has more tools to win the fight. 10%. I assume this is somewhat of a first or second round finish for Fernandez. Will look really good, kill off a ton of Judas, but Judas might be able to take over the fight with a volume down the stretch. So how are you handling those two?
It's an interesting fight. Yeah, if you start running optimal lineups, you start to get a lot of Judas, and she had a ton of volume in her Contender Series fight. She's not really somebody that I'm interested in fading. What I am interested in is maybe having more Fernandez than people are going to have. So it's one of those fights I haven't heard people say a positive thing about Fernandez the whole week, right? Like trying to listen to different podcasts, but she's a favorite fighter. What was that?
experience, I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, what else can you go for? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a little bit of a scary line because I think Judas is going to be really highly owned. But Judas does have some safety, so I think for like cash games, I think Judas is definitely a place you want to go. And I've got her written up. I'm interested in being at the field or maybe over because I do think that her if she gets a win, it's she's only 7,200. It could be really high volume. So it could have a nice score attached to it. And so, and even in a loss, right? Like even if she's getting like a high volume decision loss, she's not going to give you a zero, most likely. So yeah, I'm going to be right there with the field,
It's
with her in my
terrifying.
lineups. But it is, I think Fernandez is an interesting flip on that script. And because like Fernandez is still the favorite fighter, so if she does get the win, especially if it's like a really early win, then those Fernandez lineups are going to look a lot better.
Absolutely. You didn't even want to touch Kawamba. How are you handling that? Low volume. There's just not a lot there to get behind. But I feel like Almeida's fights have produced from a fantasy standpoint. The bigger the slate, I feel like this fight was going to be hidden, right? Like nobody was going to go here. Now it's got a little bit more love.
I
I worry about Almeida's durability, obviously.
Yeah, no, sorry. I literally keep forgetting that Kwamba's on the card. He is like he's not that high volume. So like yeah, there's just not a lot to like. He strikes me like as like a little bit of a worse Josh Quinlan, more expensive.
Yep.
Um, so
He's
yeah,
young.
probably
I mean, we got to give him something. He's young. He's raw.
yeah. I mean, and like any of these guys that like win their fights, right? And anybody can go out there and win the banana peel slippage fight, right? Where their opponent just falls down, suddenly they got a first round win. But yeah, like looking at Kwamba's like contender series fight, I think that was like what keeps making me forget about him is that like he won that fight in his decision, 3 round decision, 43 significant strikes, 6 seconds of control time, no takedowns. That was it. That would be like one of the lowest scoring wins that you could see. I think that would be probably a 50 something or 40 point DK win. It's like, yeah, I don't know that it's something that I'm super interested in. He does have about a 20% chance of getting a first round win by the Vegas odds. So in my 150 set, I'm not going to have like zero of him, and like anything could happen. So I think you've got to consider him in all formats, like in terms of like, or I guess maybe all contest sizes. I don't think he's like a cash game player or anything like that, but yeah, not that interested in Kwamba. I'm going to roster him to some percentage, that maybe is reflective of his first round win odds, but not. Or he just hasn't. He's so low volume in that contender series fight. He's not somebody I want to put like a ton of my money behind.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we have both loved the Knutson side for our ceiling. Pilastri's right there. I mean, it's just, the problem is her ownership is pretty high for potentially being on her back. Is she a leverage type of play? But she's not leveraged because it's not like anyone's going to have Knutson. So it's like, if Pilastri looks like $1,000,000, she could be the one that has the win equity out of all these fighters. Well, the
Yeah,
underdogs.
I'm interested in these female fights because I think there's going to be at least one side of these female fights that's way under owned, and if it goes the other way, you are going to be getting a lot of leverage. So I don't like mind Pilastri. I'm not against Pilastri, but yeah, I'm really interested in Knutson because I do think you'll be getting similar to like the Gabriela Fernandez philosophy, but I like Knutson better than Fernandez. Like I think Fernandez could get priced at 9,000, could get like a submission win that doesn't come with a lot of points. I feel like Knutson's much more likely to be high volume, get multiple takedowns, add the significant strikes, and get like a ground and pound kind of win that would be like high scoring, or just like add a bunch of significant strikes, 2 takedowns over 3 rounds, and then suddenly you're looking at because like her last fight was 110 point decision win. Like that's fantastic, right? That beats a 105 first round win, right? A 110 decision. So I like Knutson as like leverage off of the Plastry, people that might be playing her for just for the like the safety or the 7,100 price tag. But yeah, I like both sides of the female fights.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it really is contest selection for how you're going to handle this. And I do love that there's so many grapplers. It's just there's even people behind the heavy knockouts guys. There's really no way to differentiate like too crazy, but maybe middle range builds. I mean, is that really going to be the way to do it? Because like I said, I feel like just grabbing the Judas really starts opening up your salary with a little bit of confidence behind her. Like what's the real way to do it, man? Because I feel like maybe fading main event, I mean, that's going to be on the table.
Yeah, I do think the fading the main event is on the table. I do think just paying attention to total ownership in your lineup. And I don't think it's the worst card to leave some salary on the table just to avoid duplication. And there's some gaps in the pricing. So you're not necessarily able to go all the way to 50,000 anyway. And fill out the entire salary cap, but maybe leaving a few hundred on the table is going to give you some less, if you're multi-entering, is leaving a few hundred on the table is going to give you less of these really high-priced fighters that I think could end up being over-owned compared to some of the fighters in the range.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And listen, we finally got DK pick 6. Rotogrinder says a DK pick 6 Firefox extension. In case you missed it, RG premium subscribers can now use the DK RG Pick 6 browser extension on Firefox to have our premium props and pick'em projections overlaid onto the screen so you can easily and find the lines with the best value for all expert picks in one place. Download it on Firefox today. Do you have pick 6? Because I'm actually just before I had the ad read, I'm looking and poking around. There's pick 6 control time, John. That's wild to me. And it's even on both sides. I mean, I'm looking at 2 things. I'm looking at Nerdenbeke, 4.5 minutes of control time. High stand, 4.5 minutes. If either of those 2 guys gets finished, that thing's going under. There's just ways to kind of make some money outside of just our old DFS land.
Yeah, we just we got pick 6 in Virginia not too long ago. So I'm pretty interested in it. And I also like the idea that I think that along with them rolling out pick 6, they've really fleshed out the fight props on the sports book as well. You used to, now you can bet over under significant strikes, like takedowns, like that feels like something that wasn't there a couple months ago. And it's an interesting way to hedge DFS lineups, or really just look and think I think that this fighter might actually end their fight early and not get that many takedowns or not get that many significant strikes. Is an interesting angle on the fight props. And same thing with the pick 6. I presume I am intending to get into that as it's been rolled out into Virginia.
Yeah, no, very interesting side of things to get into as well. TJ, if you're playing Jose Johnson on this slate, which we mentioned, you better hope he doesn't get somebody just Kazaki just grabs him, rips him down to the mat. There's a world where he gets taken down 9 times, 10 times because Almabayev.
I got lots of Almabayev too, so okay, I'm not too worried about that. When I said that, I had 3 lineups and I went with 2 Almabayev, 1 Johnson, but I have 11 lineups now, so I've just been building as the show goes on, as I usually do. Are there any, as I try and just do a very non-chalky mid-range build, fading some of these super chalky guys, are there any fights in this event that you could conceivably target 2 fighters in the same fight because it's going to be so grappling and takedown heavy?
Interesting.
I don't know if there's anything that's that strong, because you'd want that in a main event, in a 5-round fight.
Yeah.
Dare I say Judas and Fernandez, if it stays on the feet and they just trade back and forth? Hell, if they end up reversing, we saw it before. That's the only world, but I wouldn't say that's the best thing to do on this slate. Just do what we said, get the leverage points and kind of use lower own guys.
That's what I try to do, and then I just have so many lineups where I already have one of Quinlan or Fugit, however you say his name, Fugit. Then I just
Armfield.
I get it. It's just in the specific build. It's in the specific build. I was trying to see if something would work, but I just don't have to build that way in that lineup.
Well, logic dictates the main event, right?
Yeah.
I would maybe go the Armfield height stand fight is the one that's most likely you'd want to stack, but I still think that's a long shot.
Yeah, I don't think I need to do that. I was just curious if it was at all reasonable for any of them. J3 wants my UFC lock of the night today.
My the people we tagged.
My UFC lock. No, I know what I'm talking about here now. My UFC lock of the night is that for DFS, the winner of Quinlan and Fujit will be in the optimal lineup. You need them in every lineup you play today. That's my hot take. And from a who is going to win perspective, Almeida is going to beat what's his face, Kwamba today. There's my TJ's UFC lock of the nights from a guy who knows nothing about UFC.
And I love that though, because here's the thing: Almeida, action fighter. All three fights have absolutely produced from a fantasy standpoint. Nobody wants to touch the fight because of Timmy Kawamba, but that's the state of MMA. Next week, man, they saved the card. They ended up getting Ikram, who was going to be 9,700. You mentioned it, John. Man, I don't think I would have had interest at 9,700 on this slate. God, right? Like we wouldn't have had interest.
Yeah, it would have been so hard for him to put up like a score to justify that price tag. But yeah, I think he was like minus 1,600 or something. So he was one of the biggest favorites in UFC history. I think he would have been, certainly one of the strongest favorites this year. But don't have to worry about it because he's not on the card in a much closer line. I believe he's the underdog next week against Whittaker.
Yeah, I mean, a hell of a test, and that is going to be overseas at a noon Eastern time start. Sorry to scare you with the 4 p.m. It did.
Okay.
Here's what they did. They said, Taira, we want you to, push the Japanese market, push it. Get a 4 p.m. start, and then they said, nah, we'll just do it 7 p.m. Screw it. Who cares? Like, they don't care.
Yeah. But it's good. It'll be good Saturday night, but it'll probably go a little bit later, obviously, than if they'd started at 4.
Yeah, let's get a little good pace out there. But again, 12 fights next week, 12 p.m. start, not the best. But hey, we want you guys to win. That's why we provide the content. For TJ, Squirrel, myself, we're out of here.